Hello, and welcome to another FHIR for Developers tutorial video. I'm Gino Canessa, and today we're going to start the process of a smart app launch using a custom URI scheme. So this is kind of taking the second approach. Back when I started the local web server smart launch, I mentioned that there were three approaches we wanted to try, and I want to kind of get them all completed so that they're all here. So hopefully this one won't take quite as many videos to get through, and but that'll only happen if we jump right in. So I was going to create the repo, but before that, I think I should just explain for a moment what a custom URI scheme is. Um, and really, I don't know if there's many good examples on here. Probably the Apple developer docs actually do a decent job describing it. But if you're not familiar, the URI scheme is this part of a URL. So it's kind of the protocol specification. So in this case, we're using HTTPS. Obviously, HTTP is another one. FTP, mail to, all these things are URI schemes. If you've noticed on your computer, especially nowadays with everyone working virtually, when you click something and it says, Zoom, Teams, whatever app wants to open this link, that's what that's using, is these custom URI schemes. So for instance, you can have Skype : / and that lets your computer know it should do this using the Skype application. There's really no registration process overall. If I want to, I can point Skype at something I write. However, there are things, and those are operating system specific, to say who gets them. So for instance, Apple, if you're using an iPhone or on a Mac, they're very particular about making sure only one person has a given one if you've gone through the app approval process and everything else. Obviously, custom apps can do whatever you want. There you go. So there are these examples here, like mail to, tell, SMS, FaceTime. Obviously, those are all Apple-specific ones. But this is pretty operating system specific. So obviously, I'm running on Windows. I'm going to do everything in .NET Core and leave the framework there so that it works. If we have time, we'll go through and add time and inclination, I guess. We can add the Linux ones very easily and maybe add the Apple ones, but they're a little different. So in Windows, you do this using the registry for, we'll say, most applications. If you're doing a Windows Store app, for instance, then you actually go ahead and use part of the packaging. You can define one. If you're doing something like I believe it's called an Electron app. Yes, Electron, that does the packaging of Chromium and everything together. That has its own way of doing it. If you're doing something like a Firefox extension, then there's a way of doing this within Firefox that they take care of the platform-specific things. If you're running on Linux, again, there's a couple of different ways, but generally it's just some files that need to be in the right place, or a command that you call to do essentially what it amounts to putting files in the correct place. And on Apple things, there's something in the info p list, I believe it's CF bundle type or something like that, a particular key you have to use. And I'll put some links to some of those things in there in all the documentation here. So some of them are easier for me to show, some of them aren't. I do have some, obviously I have Windows Subsystem for Linux running, so I can do some things there. And then I do have access to some Macs, so we'll see if we end up recording those later. But for now, we can get started with Windows, and we can do everything in .NET Core so we can see. It's, like I said, a little difficult to work with because these are things that are built into the core of the OS. But generally speaking, we're kind of doing things the hardest way possible. If you're developing an application, like I said, a Windows Store app, it's very simple. If you're developing an Android or an iOS app, it's very simple. If you're developing, all of these things. So we're going to kind of do it the most basic way so that we can build everything from the ground up. So we're going to start off by creating our repository, as we always do. So we're going to say this is a C# tutorial application for performing a FHIR smart app application launch using a custom URI scheme. That sounds reasonable. We can go ahead and make it public, and we don't have to worry about anything else. So we have everything here, and we can actually go ahead and just copy this and create our PowerShell window. Again, I much enjoy using PowerShell for this, with all of these fun things that make working in Git in particular easier. So we're going to go ahead and clone our repository, which is empty. And then I'm going to actually go ahead, and as I've mentioned before, I do keep, this is off screen right now, this personal base where I keep kind of some of these common files that I have: git ignore, license, readme, third-party notices, just so that I don't have to try and scramble and find them every time. So if I go into this directory now, we can see we're on master branch, so we'll fix that in a second, and we have 4 uncommitted files. So we'll go ahead and add all of our files. Oops. Git commit minus message. So we have that, and now what we actually want to do is git branch and change the history, so move the history to main. And this is great. Now we have everything the way we want. If we look in git status, everything's clean. We have our files, but we haven't pushed anything up yet. So we need to git push origin main, and that will do all the things we wanted, I believe. So now we do have our basic project here with not a lot here, but that's okay. It's enough for us to get started with. We'll go ahead and make our source directory, since we're going to make our project like we always do. And just to do the quick refresher, we can do something like .NET list SDKs. And you can see I've actually updated my machine a bit, so I also have .NET 5 versions here. Now, something to note is whenever you run .NET, it will run the most recent version. So if you do need to go and manually say I want to lock things to 3.1, for instance, to do .NET Core, you can do that. I'm just going to stay with the most recent, which is .NET 5, just because that's simpler for me. So we're going to do a new, and again, same thing, since it's been a little while since we've done one of these. We can see, just by running .NET New, we can see all the templates. There we can do our fun WinForms, WPF, Blazor, whatever we need. But to keep things simple, we're just going to do a console application. So we're going to do .NET New console. We'll give it a name of Smart Handler. And then we will put it in our source directory since we're already here. So we should have everything there, and we can see that looks good to me. So we'll go ahead and start up code, which of course comes on the other screen. Perfect. If we come to program, it should yell at us that some assets are missing. We'll go ahead and let those install. And just to test, we'll run F5 so that we can make sure that all of our tool chain is working and we have everything. Hello world. Outstanding. So that's always a good sign because that means our computer is still in a working state. Sometimes when you go and do updates, you never know. I've been working in Visual Studio instead of Visual Studio Code for a lot recently, so it's good to make sure that all the little things are there. So we've said what a custom URI scheme is, and we said that we need to access it using the registry. How are we going to do that? Well, like most things in .NET, we're going to do a NuGet. So if we just do NuGet registry, we can see that there is a nice package already here. Microsoft Win32 registry. Perfect. So same things as before, and we can do this in the Visual Studio console if we want, or Visual Studio Code console if we want, but we'll just run these here. So we're going to add the registry package so that we have access to that from here. While we're adding, I'm actually going to go ahead and add, and I can just do this here, dragon fruit, which I believe we've used here before, but this is just a new version of command line things, and so I very much prefer this, and we'll see why here in a little bit. So we'll go ahead and add that now while we're working in these commands. And we are going to be a little bit from getting to the FHIR stuff, so I'm not going to worry about it yet. So we have our program. We have a public static int main because we want int instead of this, and in good times we will return 0. So that all still looks right. Now we probably want to go ahead and start by, we'll make a private static function, not function, changing languages again too frequently. Private static bool, and we'll make this configure URI scheme. We don't know what that's going to look like. We do know that this is going to be a lot of things in different operating systems. As we mentioned, this is going to be pretty OS specific. So I'm actually going to go ahead and separate out and do a configure URI scheme Windows. And that way we can pull this out and kind of have a lot of our logic separated because they are pretty different from each other, how these things work. So we've done platform-specific code before, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull up here because I don't remember. I think it's, there we go, couldn't remember this. System runtime interop services was the one I was looking for. And here we could go ahead and do something like switch runtime information dot, no, it's is OS platform. We can't do it in a switch. So we do if runtime information dot is OS platform, and we want OS platform dot Windows. Then we can do configure URI scheme Windows. And we can just return this. And for right now, we will go ahead and throw new not implemented exception. That sounds fair. So that way it's very obvious if we try and configure a URI scheme for an operating system we have done. So URI scheme for any supported platform. And true for success. And down here, we will do the same thing. And this will be configure a URI scheme for Windows using the registry. All right, and this is also true for success. So we know that by the time we get in here, we know we're running in Windows. So we can take a few liberties now because we know that this is the one that we're going to want to access the registry and do everything else. So the first thing we're going to need to do is figure out what the registry keys we need are. So if we come back here, we know it's in the registry because we looked that up before. But if I do registry Windows URI scheme registry, there's a lot of different docs here. So this is where I was saying UWP apps have an easier way of doing it and things like that. I was hoping I found the Windows documentation for this before. This is good enough. But, oh, there you go, the MSDN article that has it. That's what I was looking for. But essentially, you go in HKey classes root, create a subkey for your protocol, and then give it a title, identify that it's a URL protocol, and then go ahead and give it the shell open command so that it knows how to start your program. And here's the MSDN article I was looking for that you can see goes through and discusses all the same things. Oh, this includes how to add an icon as well so that that looks prettier. I don't think we need to worry about the icons for now. So we do know we need classes root. We're going to need to decide on a protocol name and then get the path to our executable and then pass it arguments. So the first thing is figuring out where we're running from. And for this, I believe we need system reflection so that we can find this out. And we're going to do a string called assembly location. I think that's probably a good name. And what we need is assembly dot entry or executing. We know we're in the same program so far, but for best practices, probably we want the entry assembly. And we'll see what that gives us. So we can see the location, and for now we'll just go ahead and return false because we haven't actually done this yet, but we want to see what this is giving us. So instead of writing hello world, we'll go ahead and configure our URI scheme. And this is going to return something nice. So if we could not configure a URI scheme, then we want to tell the user failed to configure the URI scheme. And we can get rid of this because we installed Dragonfruit, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So we'll just try and configure it, and then we'll tell the user if we failed. And actually, we can go either direction. We can go both directions, actually. That's a little nicer. Since we're not sure exactly what we're going to do. Generally speaking, if we fail, we're going to have to return, return -1, because we've definitely failed at this point. And then here we can say successfully registered URI scheme. Perfect. So if we run this now, failed to configure URI scheme, which is fair because we haven't actually even tried. But let's run this again and put a breakpoint here so we can see what this assembly location gives us for the entry assembly. And it does give us this DLL. So FHIR, smart handler, source bin, debug, smart handler, DLL. Pretty expected when we're doing .NET Core applications, but it's not actually what we're going to want. And I'll show you why here in a second. If we look, we can see we have Smart Handler DLL, which is what it does because it's doing .NET Run, and especially in the context of the debugger. But we actually need it to launch this exe. And the reason why is we don't want to try and deal with, you need to have a fully qualified path when you're doing the launch. There is a way around it, but it gets messy. So what we actually want to do is find this exe instead of the DLL. Now, luckily, they have to be next to each other. So all we're going to do is come up here and say using system.io. And now we can check to see if assembly, what is it, path.getExtension, assembly location equals, and we want to use .dll and string comparison ignore case so that we don't have to worry about it. So we're just going to say now that we have this location, if we're a DLL, we want to swap our path over to an exe. And that's just for sanity when we're running, when we're actually using this in a moment. So I might be getting a little ahead. We probably could have done the registry things first, but we'll be fine this way. So here, if we do this, really all we want to do is assembly location is path.change extension assembly location to.exe. Now, if we don't have this file, and we don't want path, we want file.exists. So if our assembly location doesn't exist for a DLL, for now we're going to go ahead and throw a, we can just log an error, it's fine. Could not find executable, please package as an exe. And that's not even a complex string, and we just fail. Return this because we don't want to deal with having a DLL and no exe right now. And so we can do these things and say, yes, it's a requirement that our app is distributed as an executable. It's just a packaging step when you build, and it's done automatically for you. This will take care of the case where it's run as a DLL and we have the exe next to it. So that's good. Now what we need to do is go ahead and access the registry. We're going to go ahead and put this inside a try-catch block. And that is because we specifically want to check this. When we want to access the registry on Windows, we have to be elevated to access HKey class's root, which is where you need to go in order to do this. It's an admin function to register a URI handler, which does feel quite fair. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we can do this. So we'll go ahead and put an error here saying something like could not access the registry, failed to register the URI scheme, and then we'll put the message in here. So this is going to be pretty likely to happen here, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So we have our assembly location. So again, meeting all of our things that we were looking up before. We think we have our program location. We don't even really need the icon, so I'm not going to worry about it. And we know the URL, the protocol scheme we want. So now we just need to try and actually build all of this. So to start with, we need to do something like, well, it'll be easier if we add our using first. Win32, well, did I add the wrong thing? Oh no, it's just in Win32. I need to remember that. So from here, we should be able to do a registry key. There we go. And we'll call this key for now. And we want to do something like, we need to open HKey class's root. So there's actually a base thing here called registry, and we can find class's root. And we can go ahead and create our subkey, and this is going to be our protocol name. So we should probably define this up here. Let's do, yeah, we can do this for now. So let's do a const, private const string URI prefix. I like that. And what is this URI prefix? Well, we can do smart handler. How's that? So instead of HTTPS or anything like that, we're going to do smart handler : / to build our URL. And we don't need that, anything that crazy. So down here, that is the key we need to create. So at this point, we should have, again, coming back to our documentation, I'm going to keep checking these things so that hopefully we do it right the first time. But we can see we have HKey class as root, and now in this case they were using alert. That's what they were saying. And we're going to go ahead and use smart handler. And so we need to put some sort of description in here in the default. So we just need to do key set value, and we're going to pass it an empty string. So I guess we should, so the compiler, it's better to do this. And we're going to give it the name we want. So this is URL smart handler redirect. That sounds reasonable for what we're doing. Now we need to create, what else? We need to create a similar value, and I'm just looking at the same document here, so that's this one. So at the same level, we need to create a key called, a value called URL protocol. So set value URL protocol, and this gets string.empty as a value. It just needs to find this value present to know that it's doing a URL protocol. We said we were going to skip the icon for now. So the next steps here, and I should really just do these side by side, but we need to create this shell open command and then set the actual command we want to run. So that's where we grabbed our executable path before. So again, we need to keep creating these keys, and we keep creating subkeys. So the easiest thing is just to keep chaining these using statements. So we want a registry key, shell key, and this is now, instead of creating it in classes root, and there's a way you can do this with paths and everything else as well, but I like doing this. It's a little more explicit, and I'm not worried about 3 extra calls to create instead of one long one with the path in it. So for me, this is clearer. For some people, the path separated is clearer. Both function just the same. But we're going to create a subkey called shell. Then we're going to create a new registry key called open key, which is shell key.create subkey called open. And then we're going to do another using, which is a registry key called command key, which is open key.create subkey. And this is where I was saying that some people would prefer to say shell open command. Again, it's just a preference for that. I prefer this. A little easier for me to reorder the command or the lines of code. And storage is cheap, so we can afford to do that these days. So once we have this, we need to do the same thing and command key set value. And we need to set the default. Again, I'm just reading these things from this document. Pull it back up here. And we need to make sure now, I don't know if this talks about it too much in depth here, and I'll put a link to this document too for anyone who's interested in the Windows side for further reading. But quoting these is very important because it'll escape quotes for things internally. But if you don't quote them, then people can give you malicious things. So for instance, if I asked you to open the URL of smart handler : / that's why I was putting it in quotes before. If I asked for smart handler : / and then end quote space del slash fsq c colon slash, when it tried to launch this inside the shell, what it would actually do is launch, delete all files in the structure. So go into subdirectories and do it quietly, starting on C root. We want to make sure we can't do those things, so we want to make sure that we're putting our quotes in here. So this is going to be, let's quote the first thing is our executable path, which we have our assembly location from before, so we can use that. And now what it passes is using like batch semantics %1. Now this is great, except if we want to have other arguments long term, this model doesn't work the best, and that's why we went and installed that dragon fruit thing before. The reason being that now we can do something like string launch URL equals that. And there's no nice way to add it here, so param, we haven't filled any of this out yet. We can just do this. There we go, param name launch URL. So this is URL launched for smart redirect. So what that dragon fruit does, and I think I've covered this before, but it basically takes your main and you can add named parameters like this, and it reconstructs everything so that it uses the array and does all the matching and finding for you. So you can do things in any order and whatever. And then it takes these comments and puts them in help so that you can find them directly. And it actually changes these to be the Unix style. Instead of passing launch URL, you actually pass launch URL, minus launch URL as the parameter. So it does all the casing conversions and all these things. If you give it a default, then it's an optional parameter. If you don't give it a default, then it's a required parameter. So we should probably add this C# application to perform smart app launch. Should be FHIR smart app launch with a custom URI. Perfect. So we just want to change this down here to be launch URL. So, and what I was saying before, you can see if I build here and we pop back over into this. So here it's just giving us a warning saying that it's only supported on Windows, which is fine. We can clear those out later. But now, if we do smart handler.exe with nothing, well, first we got our error there, but we can do minus help. We left launch URL optional, so that's why everything else could run. And you can see that it gives everything here to say that there's the version. That's just going to pull through, so we haven't done much. The default is the the 1.0. So this is great because now we have the ability to do all of this. Now this is the thing that it's saying it's supported on Windows, and I thought there was a way I could just clear this. But we will worry about this later. Yeah, there's a way to turn those off, but it's not coming. I don't have my VS Code set up as well as my Visual Studio to do this. So, yeah. Oh, I think it's doing this because we have this out here. I'm pretty sure if we add this inside, then it gets rid of this. It just doesn't detect it out here. So if not, then return false. Something like that. Nope. Well, again, I'll look at how to clear that and pass that along here shortly. So what is this one about? Yeah, I don't like how that's... Okay, we'll come back to it in a moment. Yeah, it wasn't yelling at me before when I did the dry run. Okay, apologies. So moving on, we have something that'll tell us we have the launch URL, but as we saw, when we actually ran the application even without the URL, it didn't work. We couldn't access the registry because we need to run this in elevated permissions. We want some way to ask this, probably. So really what we want is something like bool configure scheme. We can do configure URI scheme. That's a nice, and by default, it'll be false. And so as we add this parameter, and its documentation, flag to ask the system to configure the application, to configure the URI scheme. Because remember, this application is going to do the whole smart launch. It's going to be getting these redirect URIs. It's going to do all these things. So we want to have some way of telling it we're in this mode. So really, we can go and wrap all this in here. And just for us knowing this, we can do something like, oops, done. Just so that we have some sort of indication if we're not in this mode. So if we build this app again, and we don't worry about those warnings right now, we can come here and run, and you can see it just says done, because we didn't ask it to do anything. So here we can see if we instead say configure URI scheme, now it's giving us these failures. So what I'm actually going to do is go ahead and start another Windows terminal as administrator. That yells here for a second. And find this directory. We'll just copy it over to make, again, life simple. So I now have this other command window here. Now I'll just note, again, nice thing, the way all the terminal and everything's set up, you can see this one includes these lightning prefixes to remind me that I'm in an admin terminal. So that way I don't do things that I shouldn't be doing as an admin. So if we come here, same thing, it'll say done. We can come here and say help, and we can come here and say configure URI scheme. Failed to configure the URI scheme. All right, so why did this give a failure? And I have a sneaking suspicion it's because we never return true. Yep. So if we're here, we can just say return true. And now when we build, because we didn't see an actual exception, that's why that made me think that was the case. And so now when we do it, successfully registered URI scheme and done. Perfect. So if we go and look, and I'm going to do this off screen here first, just to make sure there's nothing that shouldn't be. Perfect. So this is just regedit. And you can see here we're in classes root, and we have this smart handler key. This is the thing we just added. And so you can see there's the default value, which is the smart handler redirect. It has a URL protocol value, shell, open, command, and then it has all of these things that we want. Perfect. Now, does it work? That's a great question. If we come over to this, and on our non-elevated window anything, we just say something like start smart handler / test URI. It popped up, and I'm sure you saw it flash there. We want to do something probably a little better than that. And so we can go ahead and say, what is it in here? Pause. Do we have system console pause? No. So we can do read line. Done. Press enter to exit. So we will rebuild our application. Now we don't have to register because remember we're just saying the registry is just launching whatever is in this path, that executable. So we don't have to go and re-register every time. Perfect. So now we can see it has our command here since it was a console application. Done. Press enter to exit. We press enter and it leaves. That's not as interesting as we'd like probably because we can come here and say if we registered, we'll come here at the end. If we're still happy, return. And if not, we want to do something like, let's see, if we have a URL or not. Because again, someone can just click on the application or run it or different things like that to start this whole process. So if not, well, we can do if string.is null or empty for the launch URL. Then we can say no launch URL present. And otherwise, we can say launch with URL, and we can put in launch URL. So this gives us the option of having it either way. So same thing if we do this now we can see our updated app runs. And this is a little hard to read on top of these things. So let me, what is it? Control one, I think. No, I don't have that running. Start it. There we go. So we can see here, we'll zoom in a little bit. I don't know if that's any better. We'll just do this way. So we can see we have launch with URL, smart handler test URI, done, press enter to exit as we were talking about before. So now we can see that we are getting through everything we want. And you can see these are not case sensitive, these are URIs, so that's something to keep in mind too. You can't make different ones that are just different cases or things like that because that does not work. Perfect. So that's probably a good point to stop this recording and we'll pick up in the next one and actually use this in order to go through the smart app launch process. So thanks for thanks for watching. And if you have any comments, questions, please let me know. And if not, I will see you in the next video. Thank you.